Welcome to the Screen the Screener College Basketball Podcast with your hosts, Mike Randall and Gus Kearns.
All right, welcome in, listeners, to the Screen the Screener College Basketball Podcast. Could have been anywhere else on the dial, but you chose to be here with us, Mike and Gus. And today we have a special guest. It's Gary Parrish from CBS. Gary, thank you so much for giving us a few minutes on the podcast. Let's talk some college hoops.
Yeah, man, it's my pleasure. I appreciate you inviting me on.
You can always find Gary over at Twitter at Gary Parrish CBS. And of course, he's one of the co-hosts of the Eye on College Basketball podcast. Please hit him and Norlander up there. And please follow all of his work over at cbssports.com/college basketball. All right, Gary, I need some demystifying, please. I feel completely inadequate to talk over, predict, and prognosticate on Memphis. A returning core coming off a championship, two of the finest freshmen that looked the part, an iconic coach, and a coaching staff that includes some basketball royalty. Will this team play the right way? Where's Memphis going?
I think they're going to be really good. And the thing that makes this team different than, say, the team 2 years ago that also was headlined by the number one recruiting class in the country is that team was going to be totally reliant on first-year players. And they literally started on opening night 5 freshmen. Even the Fab Five, once upon a time on opening night, did not start 5 freshmen. That didn't happen until fairly deep into the season. And so I believe that Memphis team was the first ranked team to start 5 freshmen on opening night in the history of college basketball. It was certainly, if not the first one, it was one of the few. And then everything blew up. James Wiseman encountered NCAA issues. Memphis wildly mismanaged that situation to the detriment of the program. And then the other thing people forget is that DJ Jeffries, who was, a top 3 player on the team, if you include James Wiseman, a top 2 player on the team once you remove James Wiseman, he suffered a knee injury last week of January. So he was gone for the season by February 1st. In other words, they were going to have their ups and downs even with a healthy roster, but they lost 2 of their top 3 freshmen before February 1st, and that's why that thing went the wrong direction pretty quickly. This is different. As you point out, they're returning a nice core of DeAndre Williams, Landers Nolley, Lester Quinones. Those players were 1, 2, and 3 in minutes played last season for a team that, missed the NCAA tournament, but won the NIT and finished 31st at KenPom. The reason they missed the NCAA tournament, and they should have missed it, to be clear, was simply because they didn't have a resume to submit to the selection committee. They had some game canceled. They took some losses early before DeAndre Williams was eligible to play. And, because they play in the AAC as opposed to the ACC, they didn't have opportunities to make up for that. So they were in the tournament they were supposed to be in based on the resume, but they overwhelmed basically everybody in the NIT. And by the end of the season, that was one of the better basketball teams in the country. Kelvin Sampson has been quoted as saying, we went to the Final Four at Houston, and none of those games were as hard as the 2 games we played against Memphis late in the season. So you're returning some important pieces from that, and then you're adding real star power, in Imani Bates and Jalen Duren, and to a lesser degree, Earl Timberlake. And so one of the points I've made in recent weeks is that, when you look at college basketball programs that have won national championships with the, quote, number 1 recruiting class in America, it is often because of the number 1 recruiting class in America, but they've got roster balance. They've got veterans who have been through it. If you look at Kentucky in 2012, it's Anthony Davis, Marcus Teague, Michael Kidd-Gilchrist as freshmen. It's also 3 of the top 6 players on that team, scorers, were non-freshmen. Duke in 2015, exact same thing. They had 3 freshmen in the top 6, but 3 of the top 6 were non-freshmen. Memphis is probably going to go, 4 or 5 of the top 4 of the top 6 or 5 of the top 7 best players non-freshmen. And so they've got incredible, obvious NBA talent.
Yes.
In Jalen Duren, Imani Bates, and perhaps Earl Timberlake. And then they've got veterans who have been through it and have won, some meaningful games at the collegiate level. And that's a great recipe. If you're looking for a possible place where there's concern, they don't have a natural point guard. Alex Lomax is the only natural point guard on the roster. And I say this as respectfully as I can say it. if you're trying to get your best players on the court, he doesn't need to be out there. He's little. He's limited. He's a non-shooter. And so they're going to try to play with a non-traditional point guard, probably starting with Imani Bates. Now, they're not going to ask that point guard to do a lot. Get the ball across half court and get us into our offense. And now we're just playing. But if things go wrong, I would point to that, that they enter, if this were the NBA, if I were Memphis, I would try to package 2 wings for a natural point guard and make a deal. Like I would send, Earl Timberlake and a player to be named later to Gonzaga for Andrew Nembhard or something like that, right? Okay. They could use a natural point guard, but they're confident they can play without it. And the truth is, whatever happens in November, December, by the time they get to the conference schedule, they're just going to overwhelm most people. It won't be quite like what you used to see with John Calipari's teams in Conference USA, but they're going to overwhelm most of the competition. I think this will be Penny Hardaway's best team to date and a team that is in the NCAA tournament and on paper has a chance to, win the whole thing. I'm obviously not predicting that. I'm just saying if you were trying to come up with 6, 7, 8 teams that can win the whole thing based on what it looks like on paper, you probably need to have Memphis on that list.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think they definitely make the short list with a couple of the other squads, that are traditionally there. You want to throw in the Zags. I think Purdue is right there this year. I think Memphis needs to be included because of all the things you just highlighted perfectly. And I'm intrigued if we're going to throw Imani Bates at the point and let him run things for a little bit. You have my attention. Okay. All right.
It's like now even some Memphis fans are like, well, yeah, Imani Bates, he's a point guard. And I'm like, nobody ever called Imani Bates a point guard ever in his whole life until 2 months ago when the story started to become Imani Bates can go to Memphis and be a big point guard like Penny Hardaway once was. And it might work out brilliantly, but anybody insisting that it will go brilliantly is probably a little out over their skis a little bit. Like, he's an incredibly talented young guy. And I do think he's going to be awesome. But are you going to have to move him off the ball at some point? Maybe not. But I should stress, I don't even think the Memphis staff is saying Imani Bates is our 32-minute per game point guard. Like, he will play some point guard. He might be the primary ball handler, but this is not going to be a deal where they're asking Imani Bates to do what Chris Paul does. They're going to put the ball in his hands, get across half court, now get us into our offense, and now we're just playing, and we're just playing with some really, really incredibly talented guys.
That sounds about right, and I think that mirrors what's happening in the modern NBA. A lot of the modern NBA, like they omit that traditional point guard and just play with a bunch of wings. And it sounds like Memphis might be following that game plan. And who knows it better than Penny, who was one of the originators of like the tall point guard, positionless basketball, that type of situation. All right, I have a personal question. Who is going to be this year's Colorado computer trickers, right? My daughter and I got totally linked on to that phrase that you and Norlander tossed around. It was hilarious, and it became a running joke in our house. A team that the metrics might love and they look really good on paper, but then underachieve, and maybe you might want to start to fade them if you're into that type of thing. And then I guess the second part is, who might fall into the Loyola Chicago capacity? Who's going to be one of those teams that maybe isn't ranked, has great Ken Pom numbers, and has the opportunity and the roster to take down a number 1 seed in March that has an All-American on the roster as well.
Right. Well, the computer trickers thing, and that was not something I planned to say. We were just sort of goofing around.
It was great.
And it worked out, but it backfired badly because then they go to the NCAA tournament and they put on an all-time great first-round performance. Shot, I can't remember what it was, but it felt like 90% from the field. It wasn't
against Georgetown, yeah.
But they backfired. But my point in that was that the resume, they were a flawed basketball team with incredible metrics. They had 2 losses to sub 100 Ken Pom teams. And that might not sound like a lot, but it's very unusual for a good team to have 2 of those on their resume. They lost to Washington, which is 129 at Ken Pom. Lost to Cal, which was 114 at Ken Pom. I went and looked this up last night because I don't remember anything from last March. But only one other top 30 Ken Pom team finished with multiple losses to sub 100 Ken Pom teams last season. Now, it was Houston, which went to the Final Four. But my point is, it's very rare to lose 2 games to teams of that caliber if you're actually good. And so that's what all of that was rooted in.
Right.
And, it made sense at the time. And then they went out and destroyed Georgetown. To your question, I went in because the KenPom preseason numbers aren't out yet. He hasn't published yet. I would assume those are coming fairly soon. But I went over to barttorvik.com, who also has some numbers-driven preseason rankings. And what I did, because when I knew you were going to ask me this, no team just jumped out at me. And so I said, I'll go to Torvik and I'll find the highest ranked team he has that I don't have ranked. And it was Xavier. He has Xavier 19th. I have Xavier unranked. So if you're looking for a team that might have strong computer numbers that I maybe don't believe in similarly, I'll go with Xavier, but I don't feel strongly about that at all. The second part of your question, who could be the Loyola Chicago type team that has incredible numbers, but maybe not the wins to get the seed that it should get on Selection Sunday? Because that's what happened to Loyola Chicago last year. I said it on the night of Selection Sunday. Like, you didn't just screw Loyola Chicago here. You screwed the 1 seed, which ended up being Illinois, because suddenly in the round of 32, you're a 1 seed and you got to play a top 10 KenPom team. Like, that's not fair. It's not right. Somebody's got to step into that room and say, hey, I don't care about how many quad 1 wins they've got. This is a good basketball team, and we cannot make them an 8 seed. And I do think, or at least I hope, the committee learned something from that. I'd be surprised if you saw that again, because it became to whatever extent these types of things can become a topic of conversation, it became one after Loyola Chicago beat Illinois. So I do think the committee will try to avoid that if they find themselves in a similar situation this Selection Sunday. But honestly, the team that could do it again is Loyola Chicago.
Right.
They return everybody except Cameron Crutwig. Now, he's obviously an amazing piece, but everybody else is back. And of course, Porter's gone. But, so you're working with a first-time head coach. But it's a team that he's going to need some players to take a big jump, whether it's Lucas Williamson or Braden or whatever. Right. But I think Loyola Chicago is going to be good again. And the thing that complicates teams like that for the committee is that the computer numbers can be very strong, but they don't have the quality wins that a Big 12 team or a Big 10 team is going to have. And so they often get underseeded. Another option, St. Bonaventure.
Sure.
They return everybody, including Kyle Lofton, who could be an All-American level guy. And, I think they get UConn in the non-league, Virginia Tech in the non-league. They could get in Charleston, like Clemson, Marquette, West Virginia. But there's a chance they could, just lose some of those games, all of those games. Who knows? And then just run through the Atlantic 10 schedule. And then you would look up on Selection Sunday, and they might have really strong computer numbers, but not too many quad 1 wins, and they get underseeded, and then they're a nightmare for, a 1 seed or a 2 seed in the round of 32. Right. So those types of teams that can be great in the computers but not have the resume that the committee wants, they're always going to come from outside of the Power 5, outside of the Big East, for now, outside of the AAC. Because if you're awesome in those leagues, you're usually going to have the wins. There's no way to be awesome in the Big Ten without having a whole bunch of, quad 1 wins. Same thing with the ACC. But you can be awesome in the A10 or in the Missouri Valley and not have the wins that impresses the committee, and that's where you get some real seeding problems.
Interesting. Yeah. And I'm with you on St. Bonnie's. I think that they, like you said, they return all 5 starters. They have one of the best defensive players in the country anchoring their defense. You mentioned the veteran leadership that they're going to have at the point guard position with Lofton. Yeah, that's a great pick. I'm on board with that. Look, we all love lists, right, Gary? And especially player lists. We have All-American lists. We have NBA draft lists. We have preseason top 100 player lists. Like you guys are hopefully putting together. Provide the listeners with maybe a player or two who might explode this season, who might be a little bit lower on one of these lists preseason. Not dissimilar from, let's say, Moses Moody, who turns himself into a lottery pick, or Max Asmus, who turns himself into the leading scorer in the nation. Who's one player or two players that might, have that, like, whoa, okay, this is happening now type effect on this season for college basketball?
Well, the Asmus stuff was interesting because, he was putting up big numbers all season. Nobody really paid attention.
Right.
Like, I say this not proudly, because we probably should have played close. I don't think we discussed him at all on the Eye on College Basketball podcast not one time until he did it in the tournament. Right. And now, I think for us, he's probably going to be a preseason first-team All-American, because it reminded me a little bit, not in the way they play and certainly not in their NBA potential, but of the Steph Curry phenomenon. Like, Steph Curry played an entire season in anonymity. They always, that's Dell's kid. He's scoring a lot of points, and David. Nobody cared, and nobody even really noticed. And then he goes to the tournament and just bombing people, and then that's when the Steph Curry phenomenon started. Asmus was very similar last season. Like, he didn't just come out of nowhere in the NCAA tournament, but when you do it on that stage against Power 5 teams, it registers in a different way. It's impossible to be dismissive of it anymore. So those games in the tournament, that's when he got on NBA radars. It's when he became All-American. How about this? If Oral Roberts is not in the NCAA tournament last season, there's probably no scenario where Max Asmus is a preseason All-American this season. Now he might because it just happens and nobody even pays attention. But now at least for us, I think he's going to be a preseason first-team All-American. So players that could break out this season. As we've established, Cal Lofton was good last season for a conference champion. But unless you're playing in a Power 5 league or the Big East, and unless you're playing for a ranked team, the casual fan just doesn't notice it at all. And so I think the Bonnies have a chance to be good. They should start the season in the top 25, and then they've got those opportunities. Now, we just sort of hypothesized, or I did, like they could lose all these games. But if they win them, if you beat UConn and you beat Virginia Tech and you go win in Charleston, and now you're ranked instead of 23rd, 13th, and Kyle Lofton is doing something like 17 points, 7 assists a game, well, now he's an All-American. And you're talking about, Obi Toppin, out of the exact same league, became a National Player of the Year a few years ago. So you can do it from there. And I think in that league, he's got an obvious opportunity to really resonate in a way he didn't resonate last season, even though he was on a very good team. It's because he'll start on the radar this season, and then he's got a chance to really elevate it if he plays at the same level he played at and his team performs as most expect them to do. And then another guy that I think could, and just a possibility, I don't know that I'm predicting this, but statistically could be a monster on a relevant team, and people go, oh, wow, this who is this? Trey Mitchell at Texas. Because at UMass, he averaged 18.8 points, 7.2 rebounds, shot 52% from the field, 38% from three. And he was a statistically great player, but he was doing it at UMass, so nobody really cared. Well, now he's at Texas, and he's on a preseason top 5 team playing in the Big 12. And I don't think he's going to average 19 and 7 there just because there's too many other good players on the roster. But if he's doing something like, 15 and 6 and shooting above 50% from the field and around 40% from three, now you're talking about a guy, if Texas is, a legitimate Final Four contender, who's got a chance to be an All-American. So the interesting thing about Texas is they've got a lot of guys who have been productive, but mostly for bad teams. Right. And production for bad teams does not get you too many accolades in college basketball, but production for a top 5 team does. So one of these guys, whether it's, there's 3, 4, 5 different transfers there, but one of these guys is going to be Texas' leading scorer, and whoever that guy is going to elevate himself in the world of college basketball, because he'll be a super productive player for a really, really, really good team.
Well, I think you mentioned all the transfers that are going to be there. He's going to be the one transfer that, Coach Beard might need to keep on the floor just due to his effect on the defensive end. Sure. He averaged over a steal and over a block. I mean, you have to play at least one big somewhere to have some rim protection, and Trey Mitchell is that guy. So if he's going to be on the floor for defensive purposes, why not have those offensive opportunities create, and maybe those numbers that you were speaking of actually come to fruition?
Right. Yeah. Like if he's productive at Texas, it's different than being productive for a okay UMass team. And so these guys at Texas, people are going to go, whoa, where did he play last year? Where did he play last year? And they're going to combine, I think, to be very good.
I think I agree with you. I think as this will really help define just how good is Coach Beard. Is he in the conversation as one of the top 10 coaches, or should he be considered in conversation for the top coach in the sport if he can kind of meld all of those transfers at a big program and yield huge success. So I think this is a super defining year of like what tier he might be on as a coach. I'm looking forward to watching that Texas team for sure. All right, and then let's get to some of the freshmen. This class is super elite. Two elements here, Gary. One, who do you think out of the trio of, we mentioned Imani Bates, Chet Holmgren, and then Paolo Banchero, who out of those three do you think will be the most impactful? And then, is there somebody that's kind of hiding in the weeds that's going to surpass their expectations and then surprise us with individual stats and maybe some team success to be mentioned with those three freshmen and maybe sneak up, whether it be for the NBA draft or All-America list or whatever it might be, whatever list you want to include them on. So who out of those top three, and then maybe who's going to sneak up and maybe be in the conversation with those three?
Well, it's interesting. Obviously, the three freshmen you noted are all awesome talents. They're all NBA players. They could all be top 5 picks someday. I'm not sure Chet Holmgren is going to be the best player on his own team because of Drew Timme. In fact, I don't expect Chet Holmgren to be the best player on his own team. And I would say the same thing possibly about Imani Bates because DeAndre Williams, unless you watch Memphis, you don't really know much about him because he's not an obvious NBA talent. He's older, but he's a really, really good college basketball player. He was their most important player last season, and he might end up being their most important player this season. Like if you were to take the Memphis roster and tell NBA executives you can take whichever guys you want, somebody would probably take Imani Bates first, and then Jalen Duren second, maybe Earl Timberlake third, and maybe Landers Nolley. You might be a minute before you get to DeAndre Williams, but he might be their best player or most important player because he does a lot of things pretty well. So there's a chance Chet Holmgren's not the best player at Gonzaga. There's a chance Imani Bates is not the best player at Memphis. Jalen Duren's not the best player at Memphis, but I don't think there's any scenario where Paolo Banchero is not the best player at Duke. In fact, if you told me I had to take somebody other than Drew Timme to be National Player of the Year, I would go with Paolo. He's awesome.
Wow.
I think he's going to be the number 1 pick in the draft next year. I think he's going to be a first-team All-American this season, and I won't be surprised if we look up 2 weeks into the season and go, oh, no, that's the player of the year there. That's the guy. Okay. I saw him at USA Basketball pre-pandemic. So maybe August 2019. He was getting ready to start his junior year of high school. Okay. And I was sitting with, I'll just say, a coach from a blue blood school, like, a big boy school. And that coach said he could start for us right now. And that coach at the time had a preseason top 10 team. He said he could start for us right now. He had not even began his junior of high school. And since then, all he's done is get bigger, stronger, more skilled. I think he's going to be great. And so I know Duke was down last season and people got their jokes off, but like K's got a chance to win a 6th national title this year. And if he does it, it'll be because of Paolo. I think he's going to be great. And I think it'll be on full display from opening night at the Garden in the Champions Classic. In the spirit of transparency, I'm not a recruiting analyst, so I don't know outside of the big name guys. Yeah, I don't see them that often. And so if I'm looking for somebody who's like ranked 64th in the country and then could really be a breakout freshman, like I'm just not equipped to discuss those players in that way. But I will say, if you're looking for a recipe, it's often going to be a highly rated guy who goes to a program or a league that doesn't get people like that too often. And so there's a person named Deron Holmes, who is borderline top 50 guy. He's going to Dayton. And the truth is, in the A-10, you don't get a lot of top 50 prospects. And you almost never get top 50 prospects in that league. And so I remember a few years ago, Davidson enrolled a top 100 player. And right from the jump, he was super productive. And now he's transferred to Kentucky for grad school. But Deron Williams could be the next version of that. He's joining a program that lost some key players from last season, and he's going to be in a league where there's just not other top 50 guys. They're not in the league. And so he's going to be right from the jump one of the most talented guys on a very surface level in the Atlantic 10, and that gives him a chance to be impactful right from the jump. Like if you're a borderline top 50 player and you go to the Big Ten, you might play, you might not. Doesn't, who knows? You go to the A-10, you're probably going to play a lot and have a chance to really be productive. And so that's just somebody I noticed in the 50 range who's going to a league where they don't get a lot of guys like that. That's
a great scouting report, regardless if you've seen him in person or not. Thank you, Gary.
Yeah, I've never seen him. I have no idea.
Okay.
but people I respect have seen him enough to rank him around the top 50, and he's going to a league that doesn't have any of those guys, and so that gives him a chance.
That makes perfect sense. The calculus definitely works out there. All right, let's get some quick hitters, and then we'll get you out of here. What do you think is the next animal that's going to show up in Norlander's yard during your podcast that's going to disturb things and throw a Norlander for a loop?
What in the world? That was a wild story. Like this dude woke up and there's just like a dead deer just laying there. Like I live in Mississippi, and there's never been like a dead deer just in my yard when I wake up one morning. I mean. And like I'm surrounded by hunters and deer. Like it could happen, and I've never seen anything like that. So who knows? Maybe a horse or a cow, or I don't know what they got going on up in Connecticut in terms of animals. But he seems to always find himself in weird little predicament just outside of his home, like whether it's trees falling or dead deer. There's always something going on up there.
Yeah, and I remember the rabid raccoon, I think, was one of those as well, right?
Yeah, he couldn't let his kids go outside because of there was a crazy raccoon in like the back. I'm like, what is going on? Like, I can't overstress this. I live in Mississippi, and we don't have those problems. We got other problems, but we don't have those.
Who knows what's going to pop up next for that urban wildlife up there in Connecticut. All right. Over under on number of days until Louisville's next basketball issue. It just seems like they always keep popping up for the wrong reasons.
It is wild. I'll wherever you set the number, I'll take the under. It seems like, I mean, you go from the, Rick being extorted by a woman and that whole controversy, and then the stripper parties controversy, and then the Brian Bowen controversy, and then they hire Chris Mack under the idea that this is our attempt to clean everything up, and then he's getting extorted by a former assistant, and they've got NCAA issues as well. So there are some programs that are for whatever reason they are forever encountering NCAA issues, and Louisville is undeniably on that list.
No doubt.
And like the stuff that they actually did, like little recruiting stuff and putting some non-coaches on the court during workouts, like it's all crazy small stuff, but it is stuff. And man, they don't need any more stuff. They need to stay off the radar for a little while.
It seems like they have some sort of special magnetism power for things like that popping up. I don't know. I don't understand. All right, and then do you think Coach Cal is going to smile a little bit more this season? Do you think having like a foreign veteran team that he's never really had before, do you think that's just going to create more smiles for Coach Cal? He's going to be a little less grumpy, a little less gnarly. Do you think it's a different type of batch, and will we see him smile on the sideline a little bit more?
I think any coach will tell you it is easier to coach older players than it is a roster that's heavily reliant on first-year guys and young guys. And there is a difference between first-year guys in your program and freshmen. Like if you bring a grad transfer in, like Kellen Grady is now at Kentucky. He's the player I mentioned from Davidson earlier. He is a first-year player in your program, but boy, he's been through it. Like you don't you can catch him up pretty quickly on what you're going to ask him to do. And so I think I don't think this is John's best roster. It's obviously not John's best roster, right, but it is going to be one of his rosters that is best built to avoid disasters because they're just older and they've got more shooting and they've got multiple ball handlers. I don't know that they'll win a national title or even go to a Final Four, but they can do those things. And I think John will have a better time coaching this group certainly than he did last year's group and some other groups throughout the years at Kentucky. I do think he's going to be one of the coaches who flourishes in this name, image, and likeness
definitely
world and transfer waiver world. Because, far be it from me to tell John Calipari how to run his program. But if I were John Calipari running that program, I would still go out and get me 3 5-star freshmen every year. But I wouldn't go get 5 of them. Or, in some times he's gotten like 6 top 50 guys. I don't want that anymore. I want 3 5-stars, and whatever position they play is whatever position they play. So let's say one's a wing, one's a 4, and one's a guard. Well, now I'm going out and I'm finding the best point guard in the country, regardless of league, who isn't at a program like my program. And I'm letting his people know, if you want to come be the starting point guard at Kentucky, play with 3 projected lottery picks and make $1 million in name, image, and likeness, we got an opportunity for you. I would recruit point guards and I would supplement my 5-star freshmen with proven commodities at other schools. And I think that's a recipe that's going to really work well for him. And I he and I have not talked about that, but I've talked to other people who suspect that's the direction this is headed. I have talked to coaches at the high major level who said they're only taking 2 or 3 high school players a year going forward. That, in a 5-player class, they want 2 high school players and 3 transfers, because, I had one coach tell me this summer, I can't take a freshman anymore who can't play for me as a freshman, because all I'm going to do is develop him, get him better, and then he's going to leave me. If you can't play somebody, you should not take them, because the idea that they'll stick around for 2 years and they're not waiting, and they don't, and perhaps they shouldn't, but either way, they're not. Regardless of how you feel about it, they're not. And so you take the freshmen who are going to be able to be in your rotation, in their first seasons, and you supplement your roster with transfers who are ready to go, and you don't build teams for what something's going to look like in 2 years or 3 years. Every year you're building a brand new team, and then that's gone, and then you build a brand new team. And I don't know that that's great for college basketball, but it'll be great for the coaches who understand it and recognize it and adapt to it.
I agree. I think the geometry or the algebra that goes into team building on the college level now is going to be definitely different and defined completely differently moving on out. And you're correct. Like who doesn't know the business side better than Coach Cal? I mean, look at how many NBA players have made, not millions of dollars. Like, I think it was over $1 billion, right?
Yeah.
With all the NBA contracts.
Yeah.
So, nobody knows the business side better than Cal. So that totally makes sense. Gary, thank you so much for a couple of minutes. Thank you so much for talking some college hoops with the Screen to Screener College Basketball Podcast. And we're totally looking forward to following you over on Twitter, Gary Parrish, CBS, and, of course, over at cbssports.com. So, Gary, thank you so much for joining us, and it was a pleasure and an honor.
No, it's my pleasure. I appreciate you asking, and let's do it again sometime for sure.
All right, that sounds good, Gary. Cheers, cilantro, grazie, everybody. Arigato.
I'm addicted to the appetite. It's a seat in the